During the 1970s, racism was at its worst in South Boston and Roxbury. Due to new desegregation laws, whites and blacks were finally allowed to go to the same schools and learn at the same levels. In order for the black children to get to the schools in South Boston, they would have to take buses given to them by the government. White students were also being bused into surrounding black neighborhoods like Roxbury. Neighborhoods in South Boston were separated by race. Therefore, the fight between races would only be prevented by both parties staying within their own boundaries. In South Boston, whites were proud of being white despite being poor. Whites felt superior over blacks, so having blacks bust into the neighborhood caused chaos. The blacks in Roxbury wanted to attend schools in South Boston, so federal Judge Garrity allowed for them to be bused into the white community. Both the blacks in Roxbury and the whites in South Boston were poor, but the whites thought that by being white, it made them above the blacks. For the whites of South Boston, segregation was key to the society because it separated them from the blacks. So when Judge Garrity ordered for the black kids to be bused into South Boston, the whites took offense. White people were angry because they didn't want some rich guy saying what was right for them. Plus, they didn't want the blacks coming into their side of the city. They called the government commies because the government let the blacks attend their school against their will. The South Boston residents felt that the government was trying to make everyone be on the same level like communists do. Like communist countries in which people enjoy little freedom, the people of South Boston felt like their opinion was not being heard. The whites of South Boston felt cheated and enraged because the government was doing things that they had no say over and were coming in and changing things without their consent. They felt as though their social status as a white community was under attack, and that by letting them attend their schools, they were being put on the same level as the blacks. Life in South Boston during the 1970s was hard for many residents because jobs were not easy to find and most residents were poor. South Boston was not a clean or seemingly pleasant neighborhood, but the residents that lived there were very happy regardless of the conditions. Most of the Irish in South Boston were hardworking and earned every cent that they had, which gave them a sense of defensiveness and pride in their accomplishments. The protection of their independence system would go as far as to attack anyone who tried intruding on their neighborhood. White folks felt vulnerable and looked down upon because of the conditions by both whites and blacks. They thought that by being looked down on by people who were supposed to be the lowest society were better than them. The whites in the neighborhood all got tattoos, symbolizing their faith in the community. It showed them that they were all together and that they all believed in the same things. South Boston was their own little piece of the world, and they loved living there. It was their ghetto heaven, and it meant the world to them. They would play around with the fire hose and would run when the truck came, or play outside while the grown-ups sit back and talk. They were at peace with what little was theirs. What made the whites in the community so mad was that other whites in other communities were agreeing with the government on having blacks bused into their schools when they didn't agree. The whites felt as though other whites from other communities were ordering them around and not taking their feelings into consideration. The whites in South Boston were resenting and hated the blacks and whites because they were both trying to take over the community. The only problem was that the whites who were taking it out on the blacks, but they also wanted to get out the whites because they agreed with allowing the blacks to come in. The whites have been the dominant race, so when white people of South Boston had the same mentality. They believed that they were superior over non-white people and had felt cheated out of what was theirs and felt like all their rights had been taken away. Poor white people only had the fact that they were white to set them apart from the blacks. If the superiority in color was no longer there, and they would feel even worse about their condition. The white folks in their town wanted white supremacy to stay intact within their community. The whites began fighting and rioting against the blacks because they felt that they weren't being acknowledged. They were mad about the blacks coming into on the buses to their community and not being able to do anything about it because the police protected them. The police protected the blacks from the angry whites in the town, and the whites didn't want the blacks kids to go to the same school as the white kid. This was how it was done. This is how it was in the 1970s in South Boston and Roxbury. For a minute, this was the issue that was most talked about because it scared some kids growing up, especially the black kids, because they felt less important than the white kids. So having desegregation in schools was essential. Thank you.